And Sarah, for your information, the minutes that are on this agenda, we don't have the 4 people that were at the last meeting to approve them, so we will continue them to the next meeting. Okay, we've got Jean, there's Ramona. And Sarah, for your information, the minutes that are on this agenda, we don't have the 4 people that were at the last meeting to approve them, so we will continue them to the next meeting. Okay. Hi, Ramona.
There we are. I unmuted myself. Hi.
Hi.
Hi there. We're just waiting on one more person.
Sorry, I'm late.
I thought you weren't going to be here.
It's the next week I can't make. I'll be on an airplane headed to Rancho Cucamonga, thriving vacation spot.
Wow.
All right. Now I have to go to a council meeting. So
I was going to ask if that was where Santa is based out of this year.
him and Bugs Bunny, they get together right there in Rancho Cucamonga.
Oh, thank you, Jan.
Oh, Miguel's there. Good.
Yeah. And for those of you that joined late, we are on live YouTube, so FYI.
Beth said she could make it, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, yeah, she did. I remember her saying, let's get her done.
Yeah.
Christy, I can't find it now, but last time the pages we went through, there was something that I had made a type of correction, and I don't see it right now. Maybe it will show up because I printed mine out in black and white, and therefore any of my corrections or suggestions don't show up very easily. And it was something that you said or maybe it's and are, and one of those words needed to be removed, but I'll probably find it eventually. It was one of those little kind of things.
Well, I appreciate your second set of eyes there. Catching those.
My husband writes, and he even reads, not only visually proofreads, but he reads it aloud so he can catch things, and he sends it to a proofreader and pays them to do it, and still things slip through. So it's easy.
Especially when it's a real word and not a spell check kind of.
Right. And even spell check, if it's a real word.
Yeah.
It says, okay. And you look at it, no, that's not the word I meant. I meant,
right.
Okay, not meant.
Beth's phone number. Oh, you know what? I'm collecting everybody's phone numbers now. Nope. You know what, Sarah? Didn't you get that for me one time?
Yeah, it's on my big spreadsheet, and I can't get to it from here.
I might still have it here somewhere. Let me check.
Every day. Sent it to me. I think you might have emailed it to me over in the last couple of months.
I found it. Mary Beth, you want me to text you the number?
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
I'll do that right now.
Thanks.
So who is at the depot?
Who are we waiting for? Is that what you asked?
No, who is at the depot?
Oh, it's
There
just,
she is.
it's just Mary Beth and I, just Jan and
Oh.
Mary Beth.
Oh, okay.
And Beth just arrived.
Oh, great. Yay.
Welcome.
Oh,
Okay, we can roll,
all right.
Madam Chair.
Hi, Beth. All right, are we ready? Let's do this. Welcome, everybody. Today is December 9th. This is the Town of Loomis Land Use Committee meeting, and I'm officially calling our meeting to order at 3:07. In the depot today is Mary Beth and myself, and the rest of our committee are via Zoom, and we do have a member of the public also, I can see now anyway. Welcome, everybody. If anybody is interested in attending this meeting, that information is located on our agenda, and the links to get the meeting is also there. This is a meeting that has been continued as of December 7th. Let's do our Pledge of Allegiance. I
Pledge allegiance
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands,
one nation, under God,
without
Indivisible.
with liberty and justice for all. Well done. It reminds me of those Christmas songs that we sang when you'd sing one chorus, would sing one line, and another chorus would sing another line. All right, let's do roll call.
Jan Clark-Kretz,
Here.
Bonnie London, Tim Underko, AJ Moyer, Jean Wilson,
Here.
Beth Cohen,
here.
Randy Elder,
Here.
Ramona Brockman,
Here.
and Greg Obranovich.
I did talk to Greg shortly before the meeting, and he's in another meeting at the moment, but said he would probably arrive around 4 o'clock. So I'll keep an eye open, and Sarah, I'll let you know when he shows up.
Perfect.
Okay, now committee comment for items not on the agenda. Anybody have anything they want to discuss not on the agenda today? And any members of the public have anything they wanted to discuss not on the agenda today?
Members of the public, just raise your hand and I can unmute you.
All right, hearing and seeing none. We will go now to the adoption of the agenda. Do I hear a motion to adopt our agenda today?
I so move, Jean.
And a second?
Second.
Okay, roll call, please.
Jan Clark-Kretz,
Yes.
Jean Wilson,
Yes.
Beth Cohen,
Yes.
and Randy Elder.
Yes.
Great. All right, agenda is approved. Now we're going to move to public comment on our consent agenda. But before I do that, I just wanted to tell everybody that the consent agenda does include our minutes. We're going to table that until next meeting because they were not included in the packet. Is that right, Mary Beth?
It's not that they were included in the packet. However, we don't have enough members present from that meeting
right.
to approve them.
Sorry.
No,
They
you're
were
good.
in the packet, yeah, so the people that were at that meeting aren't at this meeting, so it's kind of a moot point. So I just want to make sure everybody understands that. But with that said, we still need public comment, right?
Yes.
Okay. Any public comment on that?
None.
All right, hearing and seeing none, and then we're going to go ahead and not table the approval of that. We'll roll right into committee matters.
And today we are picking up where we left off on Tuesday with the glossary, beginning page G63, semi-rural, and I'll turn it over to Christy.
All right, I'm going to share my screen. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay. So we stopped here in the pink, and that leaves us with semi-rural. So there is a definition that we put together previously, not in the old existing general plan, but this is a new addition. A previously rural area of increasing development, having both rural and urban characteristics. I know there might be a little discussion about that. It's pretty bland, and you might want to add some detail to that. So I have included Jean's comment right here. So if you want to read through that. And then I actually ran across a definition local to me in Carmichael, and we have a definition for semi-rural, and that is in the margin here, and I'll read that to you. It says, sparsely populated areas having open space with large trees, pasture, natural creeks, and or rolling terrain. Such areas may contain hobby farms, mature vegetation, natural streams, wildlife habitat, and large open space around homes. Street improvements are minimal. So let's discuss.
Sounds like us.
Yeah, I know.
I like that.
I actually like that too. I actually like that for rural.
So would you rather?
With that, when it seems that seems more rural than semi-rural to me.
Okay.
What did we have for rural? Could we look at that again and see if we like this
Yeah.
one better?
Let me scroll up, look away. Okay. So rural, relating to or characteristic of the countryside and agricultural areas.
Well, the Carmichael one certainly seems to describe who we consider ourselves, I think. So
Yeah.
then what would we, if we did that one here, what would we do for semi-rural?
Well, I suggest that we simply insert semi into the definition of rural as best we can. That's essentially what is being said.
I think we need two though. We need rural and semi-rural.
Right, no, you have to keep the rural, but take that definition for rural and mix in semi, and there you have the semi-rural.
I think she's saying that we need both of the definitions simply because we reference them different places in different ways. Probably.
Right, then just keep the sparsely populated part of it.
Christy, do you know if we reference semi-rural versus rural, and is there a difference in the code somewhere or in the plan?
I think we might use both of those terms. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. Mark, jump in if you can think of anything in the land use element.
We
I don't know that we parsed it down that low. I think that Mr. Elder has a good point that they're very similar in that we could simply morph one to be the other. I think in Loomis, true rural areas would only be on the periphery. Everything else would really be categorized as semi-rural. But that's my perception. It may not be the town's.
If we don't have a real distinction, what if under we put rural and then just put C semi-rural?
I think that was Mr. Elder's suggestion.
Oh, okay.
I think it works.
also have a public comment. Miguel?
Right. I think the difference between rural and semi-rural basically is lot size. Rural is out on the east side of town. Semi-rural would be like Saunders, where the lots are a little bit smaller, on King Road. Well, they have the trees and all. The lots are smaller, and to me, that's the difference between the real rural with the big lots and the semi-rural with the smaller lots.
Thank you. Yes, I would agree with that. So, Mark, did you say, tell me what you said again, that you felt the town was more semi-rural than rural? Is that what you said? I'm sorry, I was
Yeah, I
looking
mean, from a planning perspective, most of the town would be considered, in my opinion, semi-rural. And then to Miguel's point, you only really get rural when you get to the really large lots on the outside of the periphery of town. And you know, it's a perception and town comfort term, because it isn't really a planning term. It isn't something that we agonize over. We look at lot sizes, and we look at development standards to categorize where things go. And so that's why I'm thinking you could do a single definition that referred to both, or you could tweak one of these or the other. But it's really a comfort definition more than any real regulatory definition.
Yeah. Well, I would just say that I think Jean and I, since we live in the outer parts of Loomis and in the larger lot areas, are definitely in a rural. I wouldn't ever consider where I live semi-rural, but I live there, and so I'm surrounded by it 24 hours a day. And so I think it's important that we do have both rural and semi-rural as a definition. Can we just say, somehow say in the semi-rural areas, lot sizes are smaller or closer to more the town, the downtown area, or?
I did a quick search of our municipal code, and semi-rural does not pop up.
Oh, do we need it then?
I'm kind of thinking you don't need it, and what we could do is I guess my recommendation is temporarily remove it. But then, Christy, if we could do a search to see if it's used anywhere, because that definition that you have, I like it. I think that represents the rural area, and I'd go back and take a look at our definition for rural and see if we should use that.
So maybe let's do that, where we put that in here, maybe eliminate that. And then I will check.
What I remember from the Michelle Green document, and I don't remember what that was, but when she asked people what did they mean by semi-rural, they were thinking of the town, not an area. They were thinking of the town as semi-rural because it was a denser core surrounded by what we would call the more rural areas. So I don't know if that really works into here. I'm just trying to catch, what people are thinking. But as Andrew said, we're not required to do this. This is for our comfort level and own figuring out what we mean.
The only other thing that I would say is I'm not sure about, hobby farms is good to maybe include, but I think we still need to state something about agricultural areas. I know it does say farms, but I'm thinking about, I don't believe that our winery that we have considers it as a hobby farm.
I would just take out the word hobby and just say contain farms. It doesn't.
Okay.
It's a farm.
Yep. Yeah.
All right, done. And then I'll do a universal search for semi-rural to see if we do use that term.
Thank you for finding that. We like it.
Yeah, that
It
is
happened to
good.
come in my mailbox just a few days after one of our meetings.
No, that's nice.
Yeah. All right, moving along. So, senior housing, age-restricted dwelling units for senior occupants, and then a reference to the residential care facility for the elderly versus elderly housing, which we did not have a definition for. And then moving further along, sensitive receptors. This might, I know, Jean, you had a few comments on this. So the original definition was crossed out, and then a definition from the Air Resources Board was added.
And the reason, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
The reason I like the old definition better is that the Air Resources Board one is only considering air problems, and their other one included noise, pesticides, toxic chemicals. In other words, it was more inclusive of the kinds of problems. And it was also, I thought, more inclusive of the receptors, the people, because they could be receptors of any of those kinds of things, not simply air concerns.
Mm-hmm. That's what I did add noise into that right here, because I did notice, yeah, that definitely applies to noise issues. We do talk about that in terms of the noise element.
Do you think we don't have a potential problem with toxic chemicals, pesticides, and other pollutants?
Not quite as much. I don't think there are activities. There's no industrial level activities in Loomis where that's really something I would be too concerned about.
And there's really no harm in adding them, though, Christy, particularly if it expands the definition a little bit.
Yeah, that's fine.
The part of the previous definition that I was a head scratcher says persons or areas. Sensitive receptor is people. It's plan speak, and I hate plan speak. It's what planners use to confuse the public. In my opinion, sensitive receptors are people. And yes, you can affect land and other things, livestock, for example. But in the context that we use for environmental evaluation and for regulation, we're worried about what we're doing to people first. But that's just my 2 cents.
This, because it's the Air Board concern, is not really talking about the big problem that we've had is basically noise, and those are not necessarily people who are at risk of negative health outcomes. These are people who are plagued by noise from a particular business. And so you can say, well, it's not a health problem, so they're not sensitive receptors. So is there something about legally?
Yeah, it doesn't work that way. They are sensitive. It is a sensitive receptor, and noise is a health issue, particularly if it's at night. A sleep disturbance is a health issue, and that's how it's considered in the environmental world.
And repetitive noise during the day?
Yes, those are all considered issues. I mean, we can elaborate, Gene. I don't mean to say we can't elaborate on it. Just saying nobody goes backwards through definition and say, well, it isn't causing you sleep disturbance, therefore it isn't a problem. That's taken care of in your ordinance.
Okay.
It's fair enough here if the way it is to my thinking, but if you think it needs clarification, by all means.
Should we not, Jen, just say sensitive receptors are people, like you suggested, Mark? It was like that originally. It says persons, not specifically children or elderly.
Yeah, I would just go with people who are at a heightened risk. I mean, I get that we have to add all these things, but what if you're not a child or asthmatic? You're still affected. Healthy people can be affected by these things. So yeah.
So we should say who may or may not be at a heightened risk of negative, or just take out the negative health outcomes.
I would just say, well, I would say, I think it's
I think we're
fine.
diluting it down to just receptors.
Yeah.
If we start to
Okay.
take out the heightened risk or the negative health outcomes due to
Yeah.
exposure, then we're losing the whole meaning of the word sensitive in that term.
Right.
Okay.
I like it the way it is with the negative health comes, because like I said, you're talking about the effects of the action on people.
Okay, I know we had a public comment earlier. Miguel, did you have a question on this item?
Miguel, you may unmute.
Right, going back to your senior housing, our senior housing definition, it's actually 55 years and not 62 by federal standards and everything else. All senior housing, Del Webb and all the ones, you have to, the minimum age is 55, not 62. So seniors are age 55 and older.
I'm in.
So a
Thanks.
bunch of you are hitting it sooner than you thought.
Yeah, especially when you get those ARP letters,
So different.
45.
Yeah, no
That's
kidding.
great. Thank you, Miguel. I think Randy, you have your hand up too.
Right. Are we done?
How about if these receptors aren't congregating?
Hold on a second. Randy, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Are we done with the sensitive receptors?
No, I think I thought Miguel was going to ask a question about that, so that's
Well,
why I asked
I
him.
would suggest that we're really getting into beating this thing up. I think the modification was made. I suggest we go with that and not worry about parsing each word under that paragraph. It's comprehensive enough. It gets the point across.
All right, thank you. Jean?
Well, my question is, it's saying that the sensitive receptors are congregate areas, basically. And so I'm thinking about, what about individual homes, for instance, in the back of Swetzer, where we've had a problem. In other words, are sensitive receptors only congregate situations that are listed here and not individuals?
No.
No, it's why it says may include hospitals, schools, daycare centers. It can include other places as well, but those are typical ones that would be applied.
This
Okay.
differentiates, I mean, a single person could be evaluated and be considered a single. This goes to the definition of sensitive receptor locations. So you'd have like a neighborhood or a hospital or something like that.
Okay, that's fine.
All right.
Hey, can we maintain other pollutants in there?
Sure.
Toxic chemicals, pesticides, noise, or air pollution, or other pollutants. Because if you live next to one of the agricultural properties, they might have like a lot of horses or cows or something, and they generate other pollutants.
But they also have a right to farm under the ordinance.
Yep, but there's still a sensitive receptor downstream, so they can't pollute, right?
Right.
Okay. Added in.
All right, Christy, go back up to that. Just
Yep.
another small little grammar tweak. Can you take out the or between noise and air? And put a
Oh.
comma there.
Yep, you got it. Thank you.
Change the and to an or. Pollutants, comma, or other pollutants.
Done. Okay, moving on. Yes.
Mhm.
Okay. Septic system, just a minor change of adding that it settles in a tank and that there are leach fields. Should, again, just signifies a directive and or action that's desirable but not mandatory.
Christy, on the septic system,
Yeah.
can you also put, I don't know, in parentheses, septic tank? Nobody I know ever refers to them as a septic system, except maybe engineers. It's always septic tank. I know the tank is in there, but I know I'm being pedantic, but I just want to be able to say, here it is.
Okay.
Thank you.
So any comment on shall or should? Andreas, this one's really for you.
Should came out of Black's Law Dictionary.
Yeah, I
Looks
think
like-
should we're good with.
Okay.
The shall, I don't know.
Well.
I
we
think
do
I'm
have a
fine
pub-
with it.
Okay, we have a public comment, Miguel.
Right, since I had to put one in, a septic system is more than a tank. It's a leach field and a whole bunch of stuff. So
You are right.
a
You
septic
are-
system just a tank. It's more than the tank.
What
You're
if we
absolutely
just
right,
said-
Miguel.
What if we just said inside the parentheses includes septic tank?
All right, it includes that, includes the leach field, includes a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, my point, Miguel, is that when people come in, they're really just talking about the septic tank. It's the lay people. It's not folks like you that are experienced with them. And you're absolutely right. And that's why the rest of the definition includes the system. I just wanted to be able to have somebody search for septic tank and have it show up. That's all.
Oh, okay. That sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, so we're on sign.
Yes. So I've deleted a bunch of or crossed it out. It's not gone. It's just struck for the moment. So we go into all the different types of signs, and this is taken from the code. It's all in the zoning code. If you look up section 13.38 signs, you'll see all of these discussed in there.
So these are already in the zoning ordinance itself, so that's why we don't need to do them all here, right?
Yeah, so we talk about, that ordinance talks about, what is appropriate or what you can and can't do, or, what these are all considered. So
it describes each of these there.
yeah.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay. It's a couple pages worth. Okay. Sign area and sign height. So Randy, you suggested we eliminate both of these.
Right, because aren't those in the sign ordinance?
And
Any
they
other-
weren't, they weren't in the general plan last time. These are additions.
Right.
But they are already described in the zoning ordinance on signs. Is that correct then?
Yeah, it goes into great detail on how you would measure the sign area, or what constitutes part of the height in terms of, is it just the artwork? Is it the lettering?
Yeah, I
So-
agree with Randy.
Yeah, I don't think we need it here then.
Okay, then we can take that out.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I thought we were using this glossary, this table of contents, or whatever we're calling it, this glossary of definitions, to replace the zoning code 13.80 point whatever it was, 020.
No, this glossary is the glossary of terms for all the codes and ordinances and the general plan in the town. However, information that is regulatory in nature, which those two are, remain in the sign ordinance. So one of the things as we go through here is what's a definition and what's regulatory in nature. Regulatory in nature needs to go into the code of ordinances.
Okay, but I think the ordinance that you just referenced, 13.80.20, is the definitions, right? The glossary definitions. I just looked up the page. So that's not under signs. Is it somewhere else?
Oh, I had referenced the actual sign ordinance for the different types of signs. And so what it talks about also in there are the regulations for how you measure the area or the height. And that's not in the definition, it's the actual sign ordinance.
Does that answer that for you, Beth? Beth?
What's the sign ordinance?
What
do you have in your footnote?
13.38.
Okay, thanks.
So like 133850 is the one that talks about the sign measurement regulations.
Are we okay to move forward? Or is there still a question? Are you all right now, Beth, or?
I just want to look it up to make sure it's in there because that's just
Okay.
the kind of person I am. So,
Okay, yeah, no, we appreciate your.
I mean, it's
your
not going to have this definition, this line definition, but it will have that plus how you actually go about measuring those areas. If that's,
I wasn't necessarily talking about that area and the height one. I'm talking about like there was like a whole page.
oh, all of the signs types.
Yeah. So is that
This
important
part.
to somebody? Because I'm assuming it is. And now we're going to wipe it out from both places.
We aren't wiping it out from the ordinance, I don't think, just from the glossary. Is that correct? Am I wrong?
You're correct. And what we are doing, and we've had notes throughout, and we'll make a major note, which is to make sure that the ordinance contains this information, so we're not dropping it. But what we're trying to do is when you have the ordinance give you information, then the definitions in the ordinance give you a definition, and then you have the glossary and the general plan with a different. We're trying to have one glossary for the definitions used throughout the town, and to make sure that we're not using the glossary to regulate these things. And right now there's some regulation in the glossary. So you should be able to go to the ordinance and understand how you're regulated. The glossary in the sign ordinance will refer to this glossary as the official glossary for the town. So there will be some there to help people get through the sign ordinance. And then this is purely just for definitions of terms used in the town of Loomis. There has been a significant issue with things not being consistent all the way across, and we're trying to clean it up so that regulation stays within the code and the definitions are all consistent.
And so in 133870, it currently describes the standards for these specific types of signs. I'm not sure it actually covers all 34 different types that were defined here. And that's exactly one of those inconsistencies that Anders just mentioned, where we've got specific regulations for a lot of these, but not necessarily all of them. And so then there's some confusion about how do we treat the ones that aren't more specifically regulated in the sign ordinance.
So we'll have a side note on this whole section here to look at it and make sure it's all covered in the zoning ordinance.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. We have to do that on this whole glossary. If anything we've removed, we want to make sure that it's appropriately placed in a code.
Well, and think of it this way, it's there right now. So it takes going a separate step of going through the code to then add or delete or rearrange things to make sure you're not losing anything and that things are properly addressed. So for example, if we don't have any regulation regarding real estate signs, then maybe that's something that we need to put into that portion of the sign ordinance. So it'll be a separate step. Once we're done with the entire general plan, then there will be a whole nother step of looking at the ordinances.
And just to be clear, the glossary now that the general plan glossary now only has sign. There's
Correct.
nothing else in it. So these things that are being crossed out are not in our current glossary in the general plan.
Correct.
Okay. So are we good to move on?
Yes.
Okay. Significant effect. So this is the old one was crossed out and a new version based on CEQA definition is put in because that's where you're going to find the impact analysis is in your CEQA document. So just let me know if you have any objection to that addition. And then hearing nothing, I'll move on. Single family dwelling, we just crossed out family and put in household.
Hey, Christy.
Yeah.
I mean, do we need that definition for significant effect? I mean, I know that I put it there. Only because it was there before, but it's in state law. I mean, are we gilding the lily here? I'm not sure. I'm okay with leaving it and maybe we use it in the ordinance, but I don't know. It was just, does the committee think we need it? Andreas, this is well defined in statute.
It is, but if we're making the glossary something that's an ease of reference thing and including stuff like septic tank, then I think significant effect has a pretty valid place in here.
All right.
One other question, should we refer back to CEQA or cite that in here so that, again, if there's a question about significant effect, the town's going to go back to CEQA, and if CEQA changes, definitely we go back to that definition.
That's not a bad point.
So, Christy, I would just cite the CEQA section.
How does that look?
Good. Thank you.
I think that's helpful also to somebody that may be filling out one of those minor, anyway, a form, and then they know we didn't make this up, that this is the standard that we're given.
Gene, you're so right. People think a lot of this stuff is just made up. No.
These aren't whims. Okay, moving along. We'll skip down to site coverage. So we've talked about this a little bit with some of the other committees. So talking about adding in or clarifying that impervious surfaces would be included. So the percentage of total site area occupied by structures and impervious surfaces such as driveways and patios, and then keeping the same rest of the definition. So Jean, I know you had some concern.
I'm not saying this is a bad thing, because if what we're concerned about is a total of impervious surfaces, that makes a lot of sense. I'm wondering that since this is a significant change, at least for some properties, I'm wondering, for instance, when we have our site coverage kind of restrictions in our zoning ordinance, when we say coverage, we typically are meaning the building. And if we change it to include these other things, that will probably need to be taken into account. So I'm kind of on the fence in this. I understand why we would want to understand the whole thing. On the other hand, we do have then, we're going to run into problems probably in some of our zoning as far as the site coverage, when we say how much of a property can be covered, when we've meant before buildings, and now we're meaning a whole lot more. I'm thinking of some of the small lots, or even like when we had the
Well, I thought we talked about coverage when we were going through coverage and talked about this exact definition.
We did. That's why I added that in.
Yeah.
right. It's just, since this is a significant change from what we're doing and will impact, I think, some of our other, the coverage when we get to the zoning ordinance, as far as lot coverage.
Lot coverage is covered by this general plan, and we went through that and actually modified some of the lot coverages in the general plan with this in mind. So I think we've already addressed it. Again, when the zoning code is updated, yes, the zoning code will also have to be updated to reference this. And yes, it is a significant change.
Okay, when it comes to whoever discusses it next, I think it needs to be noted to them that this is a significant change and it is a recommendation
Right.
Why are we making that change when we know what we have works? And we don't know whether or not the coverage that was recommended matches what we are used to seeing.
Yeah, what is can we go back? I mean, either we do as Randy suggested and just leave it at the one sentence and not be so specific, or let's go back and look at what that lot coverage says so that we can jog our memories on that discussion.
How about we make a note that when we go back into the land use document, which is after the glossary, we come back and revisit this. But I will tell you, your staff brought it up because of an existing project being processed and the issue of lot coverage
Okay.
and how it's interpreted.
I think that's a good idea. What you just suggested.
So yeah, I'd say let's go back and just make a note, Mark, that when we look at the land use element again, we go back and look at coverages specifically and then reference the definition here. But
I agree. The thing that occurs to me is Mr. Elder is correct. If you read everything after patios, that's all regulatory.
Right here.
Okay.
And so honestly, that could be deleted and just leave site coverage.
Yeah.
And maybe that's, we'll still come back and look at it, to both Beth and Jean's point, but Mr. Elder does make a good edit there, I think.
Okay. Anyone else?
Ramona, you had your hand up there for a moment. Did you want to jump in?
No, I think the discussion answered all of my comments and questions.
Great, thank you.
And it's very possible you will all be able to see this application in the next week and a half or so, and then take a look at it and see what you think about coverage.
Ah, gotcha. Foreshadowing.
Foreshadowing.
Okay, moving along to small town character. This is a new addition. The visual and social character of the central areas of town that are more densely developed than the outskirts of town and provide small-scale residential, commercial, industrial, and public uses. Small town character reflects a community where people value the natural landscape and are generally friendly, polite, and know their neighbors. Randy suggests we eliminate that last part, this second sentence right here. Let's leave it at the first one.
We want to make that a rule.
My point was that the second sentence is really unnecessary. The first sentence says it all.
Agreed.
Yes.
Everything else is implied after that.
Right.
I agree with that. We might put some of that second sentence actually in the text of the land use element if the town still wants to go there.
Almost sounds like the song from Cheers.
Yeah, exactly.
Everybody knows your name.
I'll play the role of Nora.
You're not being polite. You're not following the general plan.
And we have an ordinance about that.
I love it. Yeah, that's great. Good catch, Mr. Elder.
I have a question on that because we have rural character. Why are we making a distinguishing difference between rural character and small town character? And then there's like, they're totally different definitions. And also more densely developed, maybe isn't the proper term.
Good point.
Okay. Yeah, and that is a good point. So I can do another search to see if which one we use. And then maybe
I think they're different things though. One is talking about the outskirts and one is talking about the in-town part, I think.
Okay, so if we want it to be here, then I do not particularly care for the more densely developed portion of the sentence.
What's wrong with that, since that is kind of what characterizes that compared to the outskirts?
Right.
Ramona?
Yeah, I kind of have the same questions. I mean, I'm fine because I think the two are distinctly different. You know, rural and small town are different. It you know, it kind of does separate along the lines of what's in town as being a small town and what characteristics a small town would have compared to its then a little farther distant on the edges or towards the edges as small as rural. So, and yeah, so I mean, it's kind of a funny, you know, how do you quantify what a small town character is? How do you quantify what rural character is? Rural is a little easier, but small town is probably a little bit harder to define what that character is. But I think it's fine because, you know, you want the inner part of your town to be more densely populated than the outskirts. You know, I mean, it's basically following the, you know, the urban to rural transect, but the urban part is defined as being, you know, small in character, as compared to a transect that goes from a much larger city to the, you know, rural and agricultural outskirts. So, you know, how do you define that, where your urban part starts as being a small town or where your urban center is being a small town characteristic, if that makes sense? You know, how do you state that in a definition in words that your urban areas are to be a small town character, which I think it does actually a pretty good job, if you ask me.
The only thing I'm going to add here is kind of piggybacking on, you know, why do we have both? I can see that, but I wanted to remind everybody of our mission statement. Town of Loomis mission statement says, enjoy the small town atmosphere. And so I don't know, is small town character the same as small town atmosphere? And if it's in our mission statement, should that be in our glossary?
And then in that case, aren't you talking about the whole town and not just the town center? Because this is talking about town center, I guess.
Well, to me, living in Loomis, we have a small town atmosphere. And in my mind, I guess a character would be kind of what Ramona is talking about. And what you've said too, Beth, is, you know, where the, we have the town, the downtown, which we've named. And then as you go out, it becomes more rural. But my question is, should it be small town atmosphere? Leave small town atmosphere out? Just small town character?
But so this right now, as it's written, is describing just the town central, and it's missing the other half of the community. So small town character is only defining people that live, you know what I mean, in like that central higher density, I guess, if that's what you want to call it, part of town.
Yeah, I get what you mean. That, yeah, it kind of like stops halfway, right? It doesn't include the
Yeah, this is
rural
weird.
character of the rest of the town. I get what you mean. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I guess, do we have to quantify basically or define in this character that it is both the in-town characteristics, physical characteristics, more or less, and then that it also includes the you know, the then next more outlying rural characteristics, which I said to me that, you know, it maybe there's a way to do the reference the transect of rural to urban to rural transect, you know, because that's really what you're trying to encompass, is that your small town character starts at a small town in the center, and then it radially, in a sense, moves outwards to encompass the rural areas that are within your town limits. So I see what you mean. That's like it's like a half a definition of your town or your town's character. It's like half a definition of your town's character, in a sense.
Yeah.
Randy, do you have a comment?
I think we got it. I think everybody is on the same page. I suggest we close it up and move to the next one.
And Miguel, did you have a comment?
Yes, I did.
Go
Can you
ahead.
hear me? Oh, I'm
Yes.
sorry. Okay. Well, I think part of this has to do with population. I mean, the small town characteristic means it's a small town. And so therefore, the way this definition is, it says provide small scale residential, commercial, and industrial in downtown. I don't know, small scale residential, the one behind Rayleigh's definitely isn't going to be small scale residential, and yet it's downtown. So two things. I think the small town characteristic is that we don't have a lot of people. And I think to put in there that you're going to have small scale residential in downtown is contrary to what's happening.
I mean, the difficulty with all these things is you're trying to quantify things that are all kind of relative to people's perspectives, you know. Is 120 units or 130 units of multifamily in the center of your town considered to be small scale by some people, or is it not? You know, that's why I think that these definitions get really quite tricky, and I'm not quite sure how to deal with them because you're trying to quantify subjective things.
Yeah, I think you're right, Ramona. A lot of this is relative then, because it's what we want to perceive here, and is what's going in behind Rayleigh's comparable to, say, Turkey Creek or something else that's putting, you know, or what places that are putting in 3,000-4,000 units and not 129 units of apartments, but 400 or 600 units of apartments. So it's kind of relative. For Loomis, it may feel not so small scale, but compared to other places, it maybe relatively is smaller than it might be bigger than we like, but maybe smaller than what a lot of people would consider normal.
In the interest of sanity, Chair, maybe we make a note here to revisit this when we're going through the text of the land use element. These are the sorts of terms that get defined with a paragraph or two and perhaps a photo even in the land use element, and are effective and can be used when you're doing an environmental analysis to say whether you're consistent. But I think trying to encapsulate the town of Loomis in a single sentence, we could be here all day and we need more beer and pizza for that.
Well, I think this term has been massaged by some other committees as well. So I like your suggestion, Mark. I would say leave it and then come back if we need to.
Yeah. I want to put at the end of it, needs work.
Yeah.
That's like every report I ever wrote, needs work.
There we go. It's in my margin. Okay, moving along. Social service organization. The changes here were just to get rid of the multitude of examples at the end and then substitute disabled for handicap. And then solid waste, just getting rid of that last sentence. It's not necessary and subject to change. And then specific plan, just getting rid of that government code reference and talking about what it actually is. Sports and entertainment assembly, again, just eliminating the examples, Same for the next few. For standards, just limiting it to a rule or measure establishing a level of quality or quantity that must be complied with or satisfied. And 2, requirements that govern building and development as distinguished from use restrictions. So moving along, just more of the same, getting rid of excess examples.
Oh, I had a question on storage warehouse.
Yes, yeah, we're getting to that one.
Oh,
right
okay.
now.
Okay, yeah.
So
All right. My
I,
suggestion was that any nature was not, we
yeah,
might not want
maybe it's
some
too
kinds of things.
broad.
Okay,
That
that
can
was
be a
all.
little broad. So I struck that per your comment.
Okay, thank you.
And then going on to stormwater, just limiting that to a simple definition. We don't need to talk about how it collects pollutants as it travels. Stream corridor, there's a new definition there. The linear area associated with a stream, including the channel banks and associated riparian vegetation. Usually they encompass an area extending 50 feet from the top of each bank. And then moving down to street, Jean, you had a suggestion to have a definition for public street and private street.
I
Hang on,
don't know if that, go ahead, Mark.
Andreas, if you go back to the riparian piece, please, Christy. That stream corridor, that is out of the California Department of Fish and Wildlife's one of their missives. And I know that you have grief over usually. We lose Andreas. Oh, there he is.
I'm here. I'm reading. Sorry.
Do we need that second part?
No, I don't think we do.
Okay. I just remember you having grief with the word usually.
Is it going to be defined in someplace else then?
It's defined by riparian vegetation, and that varies depending on the feature itself, Jean.
Right.
And it could be 50 feet, it could be 5 feet, it could be 500 feet. It all depends on the botany, the soil types, all sorts of goofy things. I just didn't want somebody to think, well, 50 feet's all we got.
Yeah, in this case, it's really kind of misleading since it is so area dependent.
Yeah.
Right.
And we have had like one that was only 10 because that's what the biological study showed. So it just varies. And some have been more than that. So, okay, fine.
Right. Okay. So moving down to street and public street and private street. Any thoughts on having definitions separately for each of those items?
And the reason I even bring this up is when we were working on the original glossary back in 2001, it had public and private streets, and we decided, oh, there was no real reason to keep those, so we took them out, not realizing that we were going to have issues with a couple of subdivisions that have a single entry, and they wanted to be gated, and they couldn't be gated because that's not allowed. So instead, they posted signs that this was a private road, and basically they harass anybody that comes in there and threaten them with calling a sheriff for trespassing. And if even not that, they give you a hard time. And I even went there on planning commission business, and they were ready to call the police on me. And from time to time, one of these subdivisions will come in and want to do that. And the town has talked to them and they left the signs up. But they insist that because they are paying for their road maintenance, that it's a private road. So the only reason I'm suggesting that we maybe look at different definitions is to prevent that problem. On the other hand, as I thought about this later after I wrote it this morning, maybe the easier thing to do would just to be make sure that we put in our boilerplate subdivision language, a provision there that indicates that all the streets are public streets. And maybe that's easier than doing it here. If that could be done instead, just put it in our boilerplate language on the streets for when they get their subdivision. So comment from the rest of you on that. I don't want to make this more complicated than it needs to be. Maybe the other solution is okay. If it happens, it needs to happen. Because if we don't put it in, see, they came back and said, well, there's nothing in the subdivision conditions that say that it's a public street. So if we get it in there, it should be sufficient.
Mm-hmm. And that would be a better, I think, route, because then you would ensure that that's what happens and not the back and forth discussion of can we or can't we?
So, okay. So I would say strike my suggestion here.
Okay.
A quick question, are these streets owned by the town? Are they town right-of-ways? Because you could put something in here about, I don't know, and Andreas, your call on this one, but if it is a town right-of-way, it's a public street. I don't care who pays for the maintenance, but it's public.
Yeah, typically if it's dedicated to the public as public right of way, then it would be a public street. Actually, not just typically, but it would be.
Mm-hmm.
So I think maybe we need to even separate these out: street, comma, public, street, comma, private.
Well, Gene, you're on the right track. This language is already in the documents for people that move into those subdivisions. I know because I'm in one of those subdivisions, and it is acknowledged that this is, even though there is an assessment district for that community, the streets are still public. I think you're referring mostly to St. Francis Woods, are you not?
No, I'm referring to Poppy Ridge 1 and to St. Clair, what is it? The St. Clair subdivision next to St. Francis Woods. They're not gated.
Okay, well, yeah, I'm unaware of that, but it's probably in the document that the homeowner signed when they bought the property. That it's already in there. They just developed a mental attitude about it. And is this really a big issue that should be addressed here, or should it be put back into the zoning ordinance?
If this is an issue that is coming up, I kind of like it in your glossary, so you can just say, hey, look at our glossary. A private street is one that is owned by a private individual or individuals, and public is dedicated public right of way.
I like that.
And apparently it did not get into their homeowner documents because it was the homeowner association that has come to the town and said, but this is our street.
Huh. Well, they've got it wrong.
And Andreas, is that are those two good definitions?
Yeah, I think that does what we needed to do.
But aren't you saying that there's no private streets in Loomis? So I don't understand it.
There could be in future developments, so it wouldn't hurt to have the definition already sitting in here.
And I think in the rural areas, there are some that are basically extended driveways, you might call them, that have a number of parcels going off of them, but it was done long ago, and they do have names on the street or lane or something.
And so that actually does sound like a private street if it's not
right
city owned.
Yes, I live on one private street.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, street tree plan. Jean, you had another comment on this one.
We can leave it out, but it's striking, avoiding monotony and maintenance problems. And I just wonder about leaving those in just because they're helpful guidelines. It's not significant to do it either way, I suppose.
I like leaving it out because it's a subjective term. If you ask a public works guy, every tree is a maintenance issue. And we wouldn't have trees or leaves or anything.
I'm thinking of people that want to plant those lovely sycamores that are beautiful trees, but they inevitably will tear up the street and the sidewalk. And I'm thinking of all the ones that went in on Rachel that the town had to go in and completely take out and redo all the sidewalks because there was not careful planning on what went in there.
Well, for that matter, then we could probably just, the term is street tree plan, and a comprehensive plan for all trees on public streets, period. Everything else would be in the plan.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. So moving down to structure. So Jean, I know you had some comments on that in relation to the yard definition as well.
Right.
So right now we have anything constructed or erected, the use of which requires attachment to the ground or attachment to something located on the ground.
And so we've had crossing out some things that are excluded. But when you think of all the things that people might attach to the ground, and I had more discussion at yard because it says the yard is from structure to the property line or something like that. And I'm thinking, okay, you've got a lot of things. You might have things that are attached to the ground, like play structure, playhouse, a barbecue, patio, all kinds of things that are attached to the ground. But if those aren't helping to define what a yard is, then it causes some problem with what a yard is.
So maybe
is this a usual kind of I don't know, how is this used? Even if you're not considering yard, how is this term structure used kind of?
So I think we need to think about not just a primary building, but other like ADUs, for example, sheds, other structures. So maybe it's an issue when we get to yard, but what do you think of this definition for the word structure?
It probably is okay here, but we might need to fix something when we come to yard.
Structures are used for site coverage, just so you know, right? The percentage of total site area occupied by structures. And then we recently talked about potentially adding impervious areas, including driveways and patios. So right now, it's just saying site coverage is structure coverage. And then that goes back to our land use areas.
I think we're simply trying to define structure. It's in my mind, it's as simple as that. Then that's used later amongst the other items in the glossary.
Mm-hmm.
Now I think we're simply trying to define structure. What is a structure? And that says it very well.
Yeah. And Mary Beth, I have a question for you on this because I remember a neighbor having an awning that was attached to his house.
Mm-hmm.
And there was some complications because that then bequeathed a structure.
Yeah.
So it does come up.
Yep, I would definitely agree with that. Does anyone disagree with it as it's written?
Well, actually, I want to kind of tag onto that with the awning, because I've always had the impression that a structure would be an enclosed, because an awning would not necessarily be enclosed. So to me, that I would not consider an awning onto a house to be considered a true structure. I mean, it is a structural thing that was constructed, but to me, I always thought a structure really meant that it was an enclosed space.
Not in the planning world. In the planning world, a structure is pretty much as it's defined here, would include a carport, for example, that would not be enclosed, but isn't covered. And it could include an awning, though usually if it's attached to the house, it becomes part of that as a structure. This features prominently in the building code, and we use it often to keep things out of yards that we want. But I'm just suggesting that it doesn't necessarily need to be enclosed, but it is one of the subset of structures.
What if we leave it here the way it is, if that's pretty standard, and then see what we need to fix when we get down to yard?
Okay. Yeah, sounds good. Okay, moving down to studio, art, dance, martial arts, music. Two things here. One is this references schools, specialized education and training, but that is not defined anywhere. So we would need to, I think based on our discussion last time with learning centers, that perhaps we need to add something back or a definition for school, specialized education and training. So that's one item. And then the second is, do we get rid of all of this, all of these examples? So, you know, processing of photographs, martial arts training, gymnastics, all of that detail, and just keep it at the first sentence.
Makes sense to me.
Yep, sounds good.
Okay. We will do that. I already have a note for that. Okay, subdivision. Again, deleting extra detail. Jean, you felt this was useful to have and to not delete it.
I'm rereading here.
Yeah, this part.
Maybe we don't need it. It does seem useful, but not necessary. So.
Okay, then we'll move on. And then subsidize, there was way too much detail that doesn't need to be in there. So we just kept it at the first sentence. Supportive housing, Jean, you had another comment on this. Add to qualifying resident to make it lower income. And I think we're maybe looking at things in two different ways.
Okay, explain.
So supportive housing isn't exactly low income housing.
No, it's just we added lower income housing to qualifying residents. I'm just wondering, do we need it? Maybe we don't need to put it, but do people typically have to be a qualifying resident of some kind to fit into supportive housing, just like lower income and seniors have to be qualifying residents? Maybe it doesn't need to be added.
I think we might be going down a slippery slope if we get into too much detail.
Okay.
And then we struck tax increment. That is not necessary. And added tenant.
Besides, redevelopment areas were thrown out by the state back anyway.
So going down to tenant, a person or entity who temporarily occupies land or property rented from a landlord. Any objection?
Nope.
Okay. And then we added one for tot lot, a small area devoted to children's play. And then Randy, you had a comment on tourism, which I agree with. So keeping it at the first part.
Thank you.
So the business of providing services for persons traveling for pleasure. And then we added a trail, a public access corridor providing non-motorized and limited motorized access between points of interest, such as passive parks, recreation parks, schools, and the town center. Trails could include unpaved walking paths, paved bikeways, equestrian paths, short sidewalk segments between portions of trails, railroad corridors, and publicly accessible utility corridors. Any objection?
Looks good.
Okay, moving on. Transit dependent, I just replaced handicapped with disabled. And then transit, Jean, you suggested we add the dial-a-ride service. So I just added a phrase at the end saying, or publicly funded dial-a-ride services operated by a transit authority.
Put a D on operated.
Ah, thank you. My D likes to drop off on my keyboard. So you'll find that frequently on my anything I type.
I know, I have the same thing on some letters.
So moving along, transitional housing, just replacing an older definition with something a little more updated. Hopefully everyone's had a chance to read through. If anyone has an objection, I will stop.
Where is the 24 months? Does it come from some standard now? I just wondered.
I believe so. I believe that's the standard.
Okay.
That it's not just forever.
Right, right.
Transportation systems management, just shortening that up a bit to be more concise. Heritage trees, just making that specific to the town rather than a generic city or county. Same on the next one. And then street trees, Jean, you had a comment here to include and environmental quality, which is true. It's not just a visual thing. They also provide shade and help with heat.
Thank you.
That's added in. Trip, just making it briefer. Same with truck route. And then undevelopable, I added hydrologic per your comment, Jean, so that it's not just looking at in terms of geologic hazard, but also some hydrologic hazards. We could have unstable soils or hazardous situations caused by that too. And then
I have a question.
Yes.
Back on heritage trees.
Mhm.
I always thought like those huge live oak trees that we have, those are heritage trees, and it's not just like planted by a group of people. They're just old trees. Am I misunderstanding what a heritage tree is?
That's what I thought too.
So this is weird. Trees planted by a group of citizens or by the town.
Yeah, there's two different ways of looking at that. So one are trees that are planted to, in memoriam of some kind. In Sacramento, there's a string of elms, and they are all planted for World War II or World War I soldiers, for example. So that's one way of looking at it, which this definition is looking at it. And this is your existing definition.
Yeah.
But there are trees that you can consider heritage trees due to their age or excessive size or something important to the town.
Does the tree ordinance speak to the term heritage in some way? Do we call anything over the 6 inches or whatever heritage trees, or whether or not we all agree that they should? Are they called that in the zoning ordinance?
I'm not sure. Mary Beth, do you?
Yeah, I'm trying to think, but I think we don't have heritage trees, we have protected trees.
I think you're right. I think it got changed from that probably.
Yeah, I like that better, to make a distinction, because, you know, the time span of an old tree is, of course, a relative, you know, it could have been there for 100 years or whatever, but at the same time, as time keeps marching on, every 20 years when we redo this, where do you kind of draw the line as to what has become a heritage tree? You know, 20 years added to the circumference and height of a tree is quite a bit in some cases, and you can't just start calling everything that planted itself 50 years down the line or 60 years down the line a heritage tree. You know, does that make sense? I mean, I understand there's some
Right.
important ones that are maybe very visual and important to the town because they have been there for a very long time, but you know, all around the entire parts of town, you just can't start declaring people's trees over 60, 70 years as being heritage. I hope that makes sense.
Mhm.
I'm looking at the ordinance right now under definitions, and it says heritage trees means any tree identified by council resolution.
Okay.
So there's a council resolution apparently.
Oh, so it's that's what we're here calling landmark trees, I think.
Oh. Yep. Yep. You were right. That is what we're calling landmark trees.
Miguel, you had a comment?
Yeah, I think we're getting confused here about trees. Normally, a heritage tree is just a really old tree. Now, whether it's protected or not is another question, but that's what a heritage tree is. It's a tree that's been there generally for like 100 years. And it's not a tree planted by a group of citizens. If you want to call it a commemorative tree, that's something else. But heritage trees, the common terminology, is an old tree.
Well, it's commonly used as something that's also been planted for a purpose, for
No,
memorializing.
no, I'll disagree with you. A heritage tree is not one for memorial. That's not heritage, but that's my own professional opinion.
Okay, well, we can agree to disagree on that one, but how do we feel about having the definition of heritage versus landmark? Do we need to, in some way, address that based on Jan's definition?
Well, I mean, we've been consistently saying that we were going to make this more general and then have people go down into the ordinances, right, to get more specific information. But
yeah,
maybe we make a note here to make sure that we mirror what's in the actual ordinance.
Okay.
I think I remember when I was reading the original general plan that we talk about, you know, the rural characteristics include open space and heritage trees. And I thought I remember the term heritage trees being used. And when I was reading it, I assumed that it meant the old growth trees that we have in town that might be considered irreplaceable because it takes 400 years for it to regrow. So I would recommend looking it up in the general plan and see if we even reference heritage trees. Because in my mind, I don't know that, has a town even planted a memorial commemorative plot of trees anywhere? I don't know of any. So I don't know that version of the definition applies to town.
I think we planted one at the depot in honor of our recognition of a certain number of years, but I'm not sure that tree is even there anymore. I do know that we've had that definition of the town designating them, but I think that was the heritage one that Jan cited. But I think we can just, you know, look at this and make sure that we come back to it and get them synced up.
Yeah, we can look at what terms that you actually do use in your regulatory language, and then just make sure we're capturing that appropriately.
Yeah, because
But I mean, for more than for the ordinance, can you also check the general plan if we
absolutely, yep,
reference heritage in there?
mm-hmm.
It also talks about protected tree.
Yeah,
And that's not in the glossary. What
right.
it is, I don't, it is in the ordinance.
Okay. Okay.
Jan, do you think we should put protected trees in the glossary?
Well, to be consistent, if we're going to mirror what's in the ordinance, then we probably should.
Yeah, and
So-
we can just reference the ordinance for that.
Because as I can tell you that I'm asked this question a lot, you know, about oak trees, and anything over 6 inches in diameter is considered a protected tree. And I know a lot of people that move here that don't understand what that means. They're, you know, terrified of if they cut something down they don't understand what that means. So it might behoove us to put that in the general plan. Yeah.
Okay. So I'll go back for that and add that in. And then we were on, where were we? We changed the UBC to the California Building Code instead, since that's what's used. I just need to re-alphabetize this one. Utility facility. Just getting rid of a little bit of the excess detail on there. And then utility infrastructure, Jean, you mentioned things that don't necessarily have a conduit or like a tower of some kind. So I added or transmission structures. Is that
Sounds good.
okay? Just simplifying variants. And then on VMT, I got your note again, Jean, about is it just limited to employees? And no, it's not just limited to an employee. So I changed that to persons, but then there are definitions for VMT per employee. So I left that second part in.
Okay, but the town basically is responsible for both employees and everybody, right?
Right, any type of VMT.
Too
Whether
bad.
you're going to work or you're not.
For only employees.
Right. And then vehicle services, just getting rid of the excess detail. And then vehicle storage, Jean, you had a comment here.
Oh, well, the general comment was we removed, I think we took all the recycling uses. So how does someone find the definition of recycling, scrap and dismantling yards? They would have to know to go someplace else.
Well, we can just leave it at does not include dismantling yards.
Okay.
That would work, yeah.
And my larger question was, I understand taking out all these details, but it also means that people have to know their way around the town documents in order to find anything if they're not going to be in the glossary anymore. And that's fine for planners who are used to doing it, but as Jen knows, we get all kinds of general questions from people who are not planners and don't know their way around the documents and don't know how to search. And the more things we take out, it's just a general concern that we're making things harder for people to use this. So I think we just need to be aware that we need a balance in making it not more cumbersome than it needs to be, but also user-friendly to the extent that we can. It's just a general comment.
Okay, so.
And a question, Christy, how hard would it, and it could be hard because it's a long document, But at the end of each of these, kind of reference where they're used.
In like what code section?
Maybe not the section, but see general plan, see zoning code, see transportation plan, something like that. Just very brief to get you to, like Gene said, may not take you to the page where it's actually used, but gets you to the right document to go look at.
Yeah, I like that idea. And I think, Christy, you've been kind of saying you were going to do that all along, right?
Yeah.
When you were having those big deletions.
Well, not making the reference directly, but just checking to make sure that we're not eliminating anything permanently.
Is there a way we can just say see zoning code or something like that?
Yeah, we can do that.
I realize that's a big task, Christy, to go through this and do that, but I think Gene had a good point. It would make it really helpful for people to find stuff.
Because people, I mean, we even talk about it at our meetings all the time, don't get into the weeds because we're talking about the general plan, and then you go down that zoning code. I think we all understand that, but that is one of the biggest misconceptions with our community, of the difference between.
Okay, so I will do that once we have everything else settled.
Congratulations.
Sounds like a great time. So very low income household. Jean, you said this definition is for low income, but it's actually the very low income. So we do define low income up in the L's, and that's your less than 80%.
Oh, 80% is low and very low is 50. Okay.
Yeah. And so we also have extremely low, very low, and low income defined under the term affordable rent. So it's also in there.
Okay. I didn't go back and look up.
Yeah.
The details.
There's so many words. So we're covered there. So the definition for wetlands has been revised. So this is the definition from the State Water Resources Control Board. I don't know, go ahead and read it. Let me know if you have any concerns with that change.
Take out the per the State Water Resources Control Board. You could reference that at the end as a reference, but I just started with an area. Thank you.
And then put it at the end.
Probably should. Again, for those who don't believe that or believe that we came up with all this stuff on our own.
or sometimes it gives them a place to go and search to see what else is there in case there are, they want more information on what's going on.
And there is more information. This is a much briefer version than what you will find on the State Water Resources Control Board, as there are a multitude of factors that go into it. So wholesaling and distribution, again, deleting detail. And then Williamson Act, Jean, you had a comment on this one.
I wondered if it was important to keep the part that it is a contract with the town.
This part.
Even if we don't spell the whole thing out. Or
yeah,
I mean, what if we just left it entails a 10-year contract between the town period?
The
Well,
county
I don't
also
know.
gets taxed, so I think the county,
Yeah,
under the Williamson Act, is the official body to make that determination.
but maybe we leave it
Okay.
after and an owner of land.
Okay.
Okay. So back to yard and structure. So an area between a lot line and a structure, unobstructed and unoccupied from the ground upward, except for projections permitted by this title. And this is taken from the code. That's why it says title.
Yeah, that assumes a legally existing structure. Typically, we would use something like the setback. So it's the distance between the lot line and the zoning setback is the yard. That's your required yard. If you leave it as structure and somebody has a structure that's further back than the zoning requires, I would assume that that whole yard is part of that. Really depends on what you plan on doing with this definition. But I think it's too vague if you're just using the word structure.
Yeah, and especially since now the state of California allows an ADU within 4 feet of that yard, of the side yard.
That's correct.
Ooh, that's right. So make us a suggestion here.
Let me do some noodling on that, Gene. SB 9
Okay.
really messed with everybody's heads, and SB 330. Let's come back to this.
Okay.
Because this one's going to be important, and particularly given the town. And I want to really sort of noodle with Andreas a little bit to see what he thinks as well, and maybe do some research in other communities.
I'd forgotten about the ADU thing too.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we will revisit that one. And wow, we're at the end.
So like everybody should get a T-shirt for having survived the glossary.
Well, we're not done yet.
Poor Mark.
That's true.
Mark, we're gonna have to pay for peace. Traumatic stress disorder for Mr. Teague.
So Jean, you just had one more comment on the zoning ordinance. And I just added a reference to found in the Town of Loomis Municipal Code.
Thank you. And
fit
I will
the
have
bill?
to say, as a planning commissioner, I don't know how many years I was on the planning commission, and I didn't realize that the zoning ordinance was actually found in and part of the Muni Code, because I had it published, this whole binder that says zoning ordinance. And it wasn't until we changed the website and I couldn't find any reference to zoning ordinance. And I finally figured out it's in the municipal code as part of it.
Right.
So if I was around working on this stuff and didn't know it for a while, then members of the public won't be able to find it either. So, and that's what they're used to calling it. We're used to calling it zoning ordinance here rather than zoning code. And this will just help people to say, oh, okay, that's where I go look for it. So thank you.
I agree.
All right. So anyone else have anything to say?
Wow. Good job. Finally, that's great.
Definition of Zephyr, just to close it out.
We did it. Good job. Okay, so
We have a
now
whole list of things that we're coming back to. When do we reevaluate those ones? There was a lot, I feel like, that said to revisit.
right. Yeah, so how will we circle back, and what's the how is that going to flow?
I think the next step is the land use committee needs to look at the recommendations that came from the other committees, 1, and 2, to take a look at land use designation changes. That's kind of the second thing. And then after that, I think Mark can go back and we'll look at the general plan and any changes there that we have discussed and wanted to reference. And then I think, wrap it up with the definitions after we're done with that.
Yeah, I think a good healthy break in discussion of definitions and then looking at the text of the document will really help. And then,
Right.
and it might be that we go back and revisit more of these. Although, Christy, it occurs to me that once you've got this in a cleanish state, we should reissue it back to the committee so that they have it with them when we're looking at the Franken document that we've put together for the recommendations of the land use element, that have all the other committee recommendations, so that if we come across a term, they can refer to it and we can refer to it and make sure what we've said in the element matches how we defined it, and vice versa.
Right.
That'd be so nice too to have.
So
a
if we're
nice-
going to clean this up, I'd suggest the committee make a recommendation to do exactly that, clean it up, but leave the references to further review, as notes, but that way we have a direction from the committee to do exactly that. I think that'd be helpful.
Yeah. So would you leave the struck out sections too?
No, we clean all of that up, refine all of that, but leave the notes in where we're going back and reviewing again.
That sounds good to me. What do you think, committee? I think it's super important to keep that going forward, so that because this is going to be up one more time or two more times.
Correct.
Would there still be available a version that has the stuff that we have struck out, if we wanted to refer back to it?
Yeah, all those versions are available.
Okay.
Mary Beth, I don't think you have them all online, but if there's any question, every version you've ever created is available, so we can get it to you.
Yeah.
We are storing it.
Planners are pack rats, Gene. We don't throw anything away.
No.
If we could save what we have here with today's date, we'll at least know that was as of this point, and then that'll get posted on the website. When we get the clean versions, the old ones come off, but we at least know what they're dated and where they are.
Right. So I think this would be up to version 8 then, Christy.
Yeah. Where are we?
Glossary version 8.
Yeah, we're at version 8.
Yeah, this was 8 from December 2nd, so we'll go to
Oh,
version
this was
9.
8. Oh, okay. So
Yeah, this is 8.
we'll create 9 then. Okay.
Yep.
It is an iterative process.
Yes. And then will we still need meeting on the 15th?
That's totally based on committee recommendation. Since we got this far, if you would like to meet again in December, we can entertain that. If not, staff would say Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. And if we could return back January 6th, which would be the first Thursday of the month, at 3:00, and I can circulate and make sure I have a quorum and do all of that. And I apologize for keep tagging all you guys, but I don't want us to show up here and not have a quorum. So
no, Randy, you had your hand up.
Yes. Will the 15th allow enough time to do any of the things that need to be done in preparation for that meeting?
yeah, that's a good point, because that is next Wednesday.
The answer, Mr. Elder, is no.
Okay, well then that.
Yeah. So what do you think, committee, about just reconvening in January at our regularly scheduled time, which is the 6th of January?
Sounds good.
And could I ask the committee to think about meeting more than one time in January? We're behind schedule now. I think we're 30 to 60 days behind where we wanted to be. And anything to do to get done with this committee so we can move forward with the consolidated recommendations of the committees to the planning commission can be produced, and we can start having the planning commission review would be appreciated.
And Anders, in your what do you think? How many days? Because we have to do the land use requests, correct?
Right, correct. So Mark, what do you think? We have probably 2 to 3 more meetings.
Yeah, once you see the Franken document, and I'm calling it that right now because it's ugly as sin, because it has all the track changes and looks like it's been compiled with different documents from each of the committees. And we'll provide both that document and a clean version of that to reference. And I expect it will take the committee at least a meeting or two to go through that document to make sure that it meets what they expect, reconcile any differences that may have been from the various subcommittees, and then put your thumbprints on it to make sure. So expect at least 2 meetings is my guess, and possibly a third, and then we're done.
Okay, so Anders, if 3 meetings is the estimate,
Yeah.
you're suggesting,
I kind of like the idea of each, maybe one a week in December, or I mean in January. So if that's possible, and I know Mark is part of, you're getting all these things ready to go, but hopefully we can have them ready to go on the 6th and then continue on
Right.
a weekly basis to give us a little break between meetings.
It'll be a lot like what Christie's done with the glossary. We'll produce the document in time for the January 6th meeting. So we'll get it out to you in the next week or so. It's already been knitted together. I just want to make sure it's clean and legible. And then we'll simply keep revisiting that document with track changes with the committee. So it shouldn't be a big deal.
with regard to the land use changes, though, how many are there? And there will be people coming to those meetings that will want to represent their properties, want to make sure that, if we have them week by week by week, should we just have those at the next one in January to give sufficient notice?
Correct.
I don't know what your notes show, but my notes show that this committee approved very few land use changes. Could all be done in one meeting.
There are some of those that weren't approved where the property owners want to come and address the land use committee.
Yeah.
And rediscuss them with the umbrella committee versus the independent committees that were created.
Fair enough. I would recommend you do that at the end.
At the end, okay.
Maybe do that after you've gone through the land use element, and because what the color is on the map and what the designation is doesn't really affect the text of the document. That's the heavy lift. But it's entirely up to how the committee wants to do it.
The only issue with that is if for some unforeseen reason we're actually more quick and don't require 3 meetings, and then the public wouldn't know. So that was the only reason why I thought, I don't know.
I'm committed to keeping each of those land use change request owners apprised of when those meetings are.
Okay.
One thing I have to say, town hall is going to be closed that last week in December, which would make it a little problematic for posting a Thursday meeting the previous Friday. So instead of starting back up on Thursday the 6th, could we go the 13th, 20th, and 27th?
I'm out of town on the 13th, but if there's
Okay.
a quorum, don't worry about me.
Okay.
Just as long as we can get a quorum, that seems to work.
I'm out of town on the 13th as well.
Okay.
Oh.
What about like Wednesday the 12th?
I'm out of town that day.
Okay.
Sorry, team. I'm gone for the week there, the 12th through the 19th.
Okay.
My one vacation in a very long, long, long time.
Yeah,
Well-
we need you here.
Well, what about the week of January 18th having 2 meetings, like the 18th and the 20th? I realize it's pushing it, but I would still like to get this done in January to.
The 18th won't work for Jan.
So so let's start from the
Oh,
beginning.
that's right.
We were scheduled to have it on the 6th.
Right.
And then in 2 weeks' time would be the 20th. And then maybe the 27th. So 6.
Yeah, but the 6th, it sounds like we can't do because of the posting requirements.
Posting requirements. Yeah, nobody will be at town hall to website post it to posting boards and all of that. So
Well, I don't have to be here if Bonnie can run the meeting.
Do we have a quorum if we held it on the 13th?
Why don't I check on that?
Okay,
For a quorum for the 13th, 20th, and 27th.
that would be great.
And I can always make, yeah, let me see if I can do those 3.
Okay.
Can you outline for us a little more on what I'm concerned that cramming this into 3 meetings is not enough time to look at things thoroughly. So can you outline a little more thoroughly what we are going to be doing for these meetings? Because frankly, this committee has done glossary and definitions, but we haven't really looked at land use. So
Actually,
we have a
yeah.
lot to look at.
Actually, you have looked at land use.
Yeah.
And I have a considerable amount of edits from this committee on land use up through and including the land use table. What you haven't seen yet are the recommendations of the various special subcommittees, and you haven't seen it all in a single document. So what we'll be providing back to you are the documents that you've already seen, the land use element that you've already edited in track changes, so you can see what you did, along with formatting that includes the recommendations of the various subcommittees. All in all, it's about 30 pages worth of document, including, and it'll have some maps and whatnot associated with it. And my plan is to get all that to you in plenty of time, so you have a week or 2 ahead of the meeting to look at it, and then come prepared to make any final edits. And that's why we'll give you both the track changes version and a clean version, so you can read it and keep your sanity, and then you can see what was actually changed, or vice versa.
And
I thought didn't we review up to the table? We did not actually finish the table. We were going to get back to it because there was density changes.
Right. And that was all provided. I just don't know that the committee ever got back to it. We kind of dove into the glossary. So we got about 2/3 of the way through the table, Beth. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, and part of that was converting the text into the table and eliminating the text.
But the density was the big thing because we're changing how structures are being defined.
Mhm.
And the lot area coverage.
Mhm.
That doesn't have anything to do with density. Density is number of units per acre.
So the lot area coverage, I apologize.
You're absolutely right. So we'll have to discuss that as a committee.
Yeah, so I don't want that to be glossed over.
Not at all.
I don't think it was discussed.
Yeah. Well, maybe
we did some research, and we actually, I don't know if it ever made it to the committee, but we did do some research on some other areas that and show what they use for coverage for the various land use densities. And that was the request that was made. So we have that information, and we'll provide that to the committee as well.
So from your staff standpoint, we want to push you to try and get done with this to meet our schedule. On the other hand, we don't want to miss anything. So we'll work with, I think the staff will work with you in accomplishing everything you want to accomplish, but we want to keep the pressure on also.
Yes. And also, if Mark is doing his magic and has those documents during the time that town hall is closed, I will distribute those documents to the committee so that you have them as soon as possible for review prior to putting it out in the agenda package.
so just to kind of recap, we are going to be looking at that table. We are going to be looking at a totally cleaned glossary document. And then we're also going to be given all of the information from all of the other land use subcommittees. And then we're also having to look at the individual requests that have asked us to revisit their items. And is that it?
That's it.
That's it.
So that's four items.
Correct.
Well, one of the requests that we had was from the Alice's Alice's up there on Taylor, and that committee basically said, well, we don't really have anything to offer you, so they wanted to know what would the town like, and that seemed okay at the time and fitting, except what keeps recurring to me is what Michelle Green emphasized over and over and over, which was, if you want something, ask for it, think what you want. Don't just sit there and leave it, especially if you have an owner that's willing to work with what the town wants. Don't just wait for some developer to come in and offer you something. Figure out what you want and try to get that. And so I'm thinking for that piece of property, it might be a good idea to actually look at what would be some appropriate uses and give some feedback to the Lemus family, so that we are in a better position to get what we want and not just what finally they decide to sell to some developer and who knows what will be offered. That's just a suggestion.
Yeah. Okay, so then on Monday, on January 6th, then we will do the table, looking at the glossary, just on the items that we weren't.
January 6th, we're not going to have a meeting.
Oh, we're not?
No.
Oh, okay.
There's no.
Because of noticing
That's
this
right.
one.
Okay, sorry,
So
sorry.
January 13th.
Sorry,
I
sorry.
had a comment about January 6th. If notification was a problem, can't you notify it like a week earlier than that when you're still have staff in town? I don't think there's too much lead time that you can't give. And then you can still have the meeting.
Yeah, that would push it to Mark to have everything to me by Tuesday, December 21st.
Actually, per standing orders from the city manager, I'd have to have everything to you tomorrow.
Oh,
Right.
There you go.
well,
Okay, let's roll it then.
then we can meet on the 6th, right?
All right.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not going to have everything to you by tomorrow. So, and I love all of you dearly, but I'm not annoying the city manager.
But you could do by the 21st.
Yeah.
Mark.
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay. So I'll include, what I'll do for January then is send out and get confirmations for the 6th, the 13th, the 20th, and 27th. And those dates that I have a quorum, we'll just roll them forward and go from there.
Okay.
That's a lot of meetings.
Yeah.
And if we have things we need to think about, it may not give us much time to think about it.
Well, and that's where it comes back to staff to make sure you have the documents well in advance to think about them before, we get to that particular meeting and you only have 1 week to review that stuff.
See, now we have something to do over Christmas. Nobody wanted to say that.
It says Greg, but should it say Grinch instead? I'm not sure.
The Greg who stole Christmas.
Yeah, no, that's right. It reminds me of when I was in college and the semester breaks didn't occur. And so we had homework over Christmas. But anyway.
That's why I love quarters, and my friends would come home when they were on semesters, but I was on quarters and done.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, I love quarters.
So committee, is everybody pretty comfortable with what our task is moving forward? And we all kind of have a general idea of what's coming?
So to summarize, basically right now we're waiting for documents from staff for review.
At this
Correct.
moment in time, correct.
Okay.
And we're anticipating those not until when, more or
After
less.
the 21st.
Okay.
Sometime, yeah. Christmas.
Yeah.
Mark, that means you need to put some nice paper and a bow on them.
And a bow.
So
I'll tape a bottle of wine to each of the documents.
Oh.
Just to help the review.
Eggnog.
Eggnog. Yes,
And none of them are going to be opened until after December 26th anyway.
We'll endeavor to get those to you as soon as humanly possible.
There you go.
All right, does anybody else have any questions? And is there any public members that have any questions? There, no? None. All right, everybody. Oh my gosh, great job. We finished the glossary.
Thank you, everyone, for your input. You did a great job.
Well done, seriously.
Thank you, Christy.
That's not been done in 20 years, so it's well done work. Okay, so let's adjourn. It's 5:05, and we'll look forward to get some paperwork near the 20th of December, 20th-ish.
That week.
And then we'll meet again on the 6th. Have a Merry Christmas,
Merry
everybody.
Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Christmas.
Happy New Year. Happy New Year.
Thank you.
Thank you.